A medieval tavern did not begin with a menu. It began with a door. A soaked traveler pushed it open after dark, with mud on his boots, cold in his fingers, and hunger already turning into pain. Inside, the room promised warmth. Firelight moved across the rafters, voices pressed against the walls. A pot hung over the hearth. But the first rule of eating there was simple. You did not choose your meal. You took what the house still had. And what the house had was never just food. It was a test of the season, the road, the storage room, the fire, the cook, and your own stomach. The tavern was not built to comfort people. It was built to keep them moving one more day. The moment you stepped inside, the air told you that. Smoke clung under the beams because chimneys were poor and fires never really stopped. Wet cloaks steamed beside the hearth. Boots brought in road filth. Men who had slept in barns, ditches, and wagons crowded shoulder to shoulder at rough tables. The smell was not one smell. It was wood smoke, sour drink, old grease, damp wool, boiled onions, animal hide, and bodies carrying the road in with them. There was no quiet corner where a traveler could settle into a private supper. Space was too valuable. A merchant with a leather purse might sit beside a laborer with cracked hands. A pilgrim might share a bench with a soldier who had not been paid. Nobody had to like one another. They only had to fit. Then the meal arrived. Often it started with bread, not the soft bread modern people imagine. This was dark, heavy bread made from rye, barley, oats, or whatever grain could survive local weather and local poverty. In a better week, it had a sturdy chew. In a bad week, it might be stretched with bran, husks, peas, or ground fillers that made every bite feel like work. If it had sat too long, it hardened until the knife was almost more useful than the teeth. So people soaked it. They pushed it into broth. They dipped it into ale. They let the liquid soften what time had turned into a brick. Bread was not a side dish. It was the foundation. It filled the body when meat was scarce, when the pot was thin, and when a coin could not buy much else. The pot was the center of everything. It sat over the fire all day, receiving whatever the tavern keeper could afford to put into it. A strip of salted pork, a few bones with flavor left in them, turnips, leeks, onions, cabbage, barley, beans, herbs dried months earlier and crushed between rough fingers. Water stretched it all farther than taste ever wanted it to go. No two bowls were exactly alike. One man might get a piece of fat, another might get mostly grain and cloudy broth. A bone could knock against the spoon. A splinter of cartilage might hide under cabbage. Some stews were thick enough to cling to bread. Others looked like hot water that had passed near food and borrowed its smell. But heat mattered. After a day in freezing rain, heat could feel like mercy. A bowl held in both hands could bring life back into fingers. Steam on the face could make exhaustion loosen for a moment. That was the bargain. The food did not need to be beautiful. It needed to be warm, heavy, and available. When meat appeared, it carried the taste of survival before it carried the taste of pleasure. Fresh meat was a lucky exception. Most tavern meat had been preserved so it could outlast distance and weather. Salted beef, smoked pork, dried fish, strips toughened by time. The salt could be so strong it burned the mouth. The smoke could bury the original flavor. Fish from river towns or coastal routes might arrive stiff, briny, and hard enough to demand chewing like rope. Still, people ate it. A road body needed strength. A field body needed calories. A soldier body needed something more than watered grain before marching again. Enjoyment was useful only if it happened by accident. Then came the ale. The ale was thin, cloudy, and uneven from one tavern to the next. It was not poured for celebration first. It was poured because water could not always be trusted, and a weak drink was often safer, warmer in feeling, and more filling than nothing. It passed across tables in mugs that had touched too many mouths. Someone might wipe the rim with a sleeve. Someone else might not bother. In that room, cleanliness was not a value people could afford to place above hunger. Meals were eaten with knives, fingers, and whatever wooden bowl or board was available. Forks were not part of the ordinary tavern scene. A slab of stale bread might serve as a plate. A rough trencher could absorb broth, grease, and crumbs. Straw on the floor caught spills, mud, animal droppings, and waste until someone decided it had become too foul to ignore. Dogs nosed under benches. Chickens might wander near a back room. Rats understood taverns as well as travelers did. Where grain, grease, and scraps gathered, they gathered too. The danger was not dramatic. It was ordinary. A bowl could restore you. It could also make you ill. A barrel could be watered down. A piece of meat could be older than the tavern keeper admitted. Broth could be kept hot long enough to seem safe while hiding yesterday inside today. People did not understand disease the way we do now, but they understood bad food by the pain that followed it. And yet, refusing a meal could be more dangerous than eating it. That is the part modern imagination often misses. The medieval traveler was not comparing restaurants. He was comparing risks. Outside the tavern were roads that turned to mud, forests where robbers watched for strangers, winter fields with no shelter, and long stretches where no food could be bought at all. A bad bowl inside a smoky room could still be the best option available. For laborers, the tavern was sometimes the last stop before the body gave out. A man coming from the fields, a ditch, a timber site, or a building yard might arrive with his muscles already emptied. He was not looking for refinement. He was looking for enough warmth and bulk to stand up again tomorrow. Bread, broth, and ale were not a feast. They were fuel. For travelers, the uncertainty was worse. A tavern on a busy road might have grain in the sacks, onions in storage, salted meat hanging from beams, and ale enough to serve a crowd. Another, only miles away, might have almost nothing left by nightfall. One stop could offer a thick stew. The next could offer watered broth and a heel of bread. The price could shift with scarcity. The portion could shrink with winter. The quality could collapse with summer heat. Every meal was shaped before the traveler arrived. It was shaped by harvests months earlier, by whether grain had stayed dry, by whether pigs had been slaughtered before winter, by whether salt was affordable, by whether roads were passable, by whether merchants had made it through, and by whether the tavern keeper expected more hungry mouths before morning. This was the hidden machinery behind the bowl. Preservation was not a culinary choice, it was infrastructure. Meat had to be salted, smoked, or dried. Vegetables had to be buried, stored, or pickled. Grain had to be guarded from damp and pests. Herbs had to be dried. Ale had to be brewed before thirst arrived. Without those preparations, the tavern could not survive a hard season. The fire in the common room was only the visible part of a much larger struggle, and seasons ruled everything. In winter, supply tightened like a fist. Roads froze, carts slowed, fresh food disappeared. Tavern keepers stretched the pot with water, grain, and roots. Portions grew smaller. Smoke thickened because the hearth burned without rest. But the cold still crept through walls, under doors, and into bones. In summer, the threat changed. Heat worked against every stored thing. Meat spoiled faster. Broth soured. Flies found uncovered bowls. Smells sharpened. A tavern keeper had to serve food before it died in the wrong way. And a hungry traveler had to decide how much suspicion he could afford. The tavern also fed something besides bodies. It fed information. At a single table, a carter might hear that a bridge had washed out. A pilgrim might learn which lord had raised a toll. A peddler might carry news of war, disease, prices, harvest failure, or a city market where grain still moved. In a world without fast messages, taverns became noisy exchange points held together by smoke, hunger, and weak ale. But that made them unstable too. Men argued over places near the fire. They argued over portions. They argued over debts, insults, dice, prices, and whose hand had reached for whose cup. Exhaustion shortened tempers. Alcohol loosened judgment. A room that saved strangers from the cold could turn against them over a crust of bread. By the end of the night, nobody mistook the meal for luxury. The bowls were scraped, the bread was gone, or saved in a sleeve for the road. The last ale was swallowed, cloudy and flat. Some travelers paid for a place on straw. Others slept upright against a wall, one hand near their purse. The fire settled lower, and the room that had seemed alive with voices sank into coughs, murmurs, and the shifting of tired bodies. Outside, the road waited exactly as it had been before. Cold, dark, hungry. That is what a medieval tavern meal really was. Not dinner as comfort, not hospitality as we understand it, not a charming stop on a candlelit journey. It was a temporary truce with hunger. A hard piece of bread made softer by broth. A bowl from a pot that held the day's luck and the season's failures. A mug of ale passed through hands that had nowhere else to go. For a few minutes, the body was warmer. The stomach was less empty. The road seemed a little farther away. And in the medieval world, that was enough to make the tavern worth entering.